Hey chess friends, National Master James Canty III here with Chess.com, and today we have the top 5 Endgames from Anatoly Karpov, the man himself. Now, in fact, let's look at the first one here. This is Karpov versus Evgeny Gick in 1968. Well, we have this position right here with white, and this is in-game-ish, especially what's going to happen in the next few moves here. In fact, after queen takes f3, which is the last move from Gick here, rook takes h5, and we're attacking h7. So there's going to be some problems here, obviously, because mate is in the air. So he plays e6 to get out of the mate. If queen takes h7, we go king f8. And then there was g6 in this position right now. g6, yes, that was a move. That is exactly what he played here. g6, what a move, opening up everything, and it's about to get a little crazy. Now, this is where it's going to get in-game-ish right here after knight takes g6. And then queen takes h7, king to f8. And now right here, pause the video if you need to. It is your move. What did Karpov do in this position? White to move, famous position. What do you do? Here it is. Well, he plays rook f5 and we live. What a move. Wow, that is crazy. If pawn takes f5, then there's mate and we great, right? GG, start a new one. Bishop on the other side of the board is doing damage and helping in this attack. We're also threatening mate right now and the queen all at the same time. You in a lot of trouble, big fella. So after rook f5, queen takes b3. Just get rid of the bishop. And now we reach a position that is sort of in-game-ish. And if you think about this, if white is not able to coordinate with the knight and the queen, you're going to be in a lot of trouble, actually, because black has 3 pieces, but they are not coordinated. There's holes all in the position for black. Terrible position, but let's see what happens. After knight e takes f5, there was knight to f4. Isn't the knight just hanging? I mean, isn't it? Well, it is. You can take the knight if you like to, but if you take the knight, go knight. You're about to go knight. After knight takes check, sheesh, king e7 and takes on a8. Ouch. So he didn't do that, obviously, and then rook to d8. Well, after rook d8, cool. We just make it simple here. Queen h6, and then take on g6. Everything's going with check here. Then we take the extra pawn in this manner. Everything was checked. Then we grab the extra pawn, and this is going to be easy. We don't have to deal with 3 pieces anymore. We only have to deal with 2 now, says Karpov. Rook to c8, queen to g8, check. King e7. Queen g7, king d8, and then f6. And the game was over from here. Like, he just resigned. Well, of course, I would too. Absolutely. I mean, probably resigned many moves before this, but in a lot of trouble here. And this was number 1 of the top 5 endgames from Karpov. Let's look at endgame number 2. And here we are with endgame number 2. This is Anatoly Karpov with white versus Vladimir Hort in 1973. This is the position on the board after move 27. And white actually played f3 right here. So after the f3 move, black plays rook to c8, saying, hey, I'm trying to trade. I want to go into an endgame. Now, one thing to know about endgames is the pawn structure. The skeleton pawn structure, meaning the pawns on the board, are the GPS of the game. That's where your plans and ideas are, and you can actually just do full plans and play an entire game just by understanding what the pawn structure tells you. So in this case, absolutely, I'm going to take this rook and not even think twice about it. After bishop takes, we now have a huge target. Now, of course, we have double pawns too, but they aren't really that easy to get to, and they can be pushed, and my king is around it. On the other hand, to make it slightly equal, slightly better for white, honestly, is this ISO pawn here. Isolated pawn, something that's a target, and it's on a light square, which means I have a light square bishop, and your pawns, as black, are on light squares, which makes your bishop even worse, and more targets for me as well. So white's slightly better, but virtually an equal in game right now. After bishop takes c8, king to f2, we're getting at king to the center of the board as quickly as possible. No queens on the board, no rooks to really kind of bother us in a way, and there's no real danger. You need to get your king to the center of the board, especially in endgames. After king f2, king e7, and king e3, king e7. Centralize as quickly as possible. Then we figure out what we want to do later. After we centralize, step 2 here, gain space. Before he gained some space here, stopping a5. In fact, they call this a pawn freeze from Dvoretsky's endgame manual, where actually one pawn can freeze multiple. So if we had a third pawn here, this one pawn freezes all 3 of pawns if there was a pawn here. But right now, one pawn stopping 2, but we're also, gaining a little bit of space. Now after b4, there's g6 here to actually just kind of neutralize the bishop, but at the same time, we still have some targets here as white. And then g4, a move from Karpov here, gaining more space. Why not? If you're going to give me the space, I'm going to take the space. And then knight to d7. Okay, black to move or white to move. Where's he going? Knight b6 for knight to c4 is usually what something he's looking to do. Trying to get a little bit of activity, get mobile. So you have to be careful playing a move like a3 because that runs literally right into knight b6 for knight to c4. So what does he do? He gains some more space, f4. If I'm able to get f5 in and you trade, now I don't have the double pawn anymore, and you're really worse in this position with the black pieces because now you have an isolated pawn and I don't have a weakness anymore, being my double pawn as the weakness. Knight to f8, rerouting, going for like knight e6, bishop e6, staying around the pawns. After knight f8, gain space here. In fact, you find out what Karpov did here. You guessed the move here. What did Karpov do? You want to gain some more space. Here it is. Karpov played an easy move, g5. Of course, if you found that, very good. f5 could have been played as well, but g5 was actually just much better. If the f5 move, I mean, there's king f6, king f4, g5. So, you could play this, but g5 is more of a squeezing boa constrictor, his nickname, right? It's something you want to do here. So he's just tying down a position, slowly squeezing, gaining a little bit of space here and a little bit of space here, and then you're going to be left moving nothing. After the g5 move here, there is a king to d6, just getting the king a little bit more closer to the center here. I can't go to any of the squares, but I am defending d5, which can be a weakness and will be if we leave it unattended. King to f3, sidestepping, but also threatening maybe g4 for f5. After king f3, there was knight to e6. And right here was the blunder by Hort. In fact, it's very hard to make a move like this. It is extremely hard to make a move like this. But in fact, the best move was bishop to e6, which is strange. So now if knight takes e6, knight takes, yeah, white's still slightly better, actually. But you have a little bit more flexibility, and the bishop doesn't have the scope we're really looking for. Yeah, we have targets, but we can't really hit the targets. So it's better to play in this fashion for Hort than it was with the natural move knight to e6. It's very natural to put the knight there to keep the bishop for the endgame, then put the bishop there to keep the knight for the endgame. So after knight to e6, he just literally snapped it here, bam, and now that's already literally over +1, almost +2 here after knight takes and bishop takes. Now, this is a position that you definitely need to be studying and learning. Same color bishop in game here. So white is just better all around. Why is white better all around? Well, black has all of his pawns on light squares. Literally, you have the wrong bishop. Right pawns, wrong bishop. Because it's hitting nothing at all. It's always going to be around these, and you're hitting your own pawns no matter what. White also has the light square bishop, so we have lots of targets here to hit. I mean, at the right moments, especially if the bishop can get behind the king, behind black's king. For instance, if we get on this diagonal, maybe this one, any of these squares could be very, very bad for black. Let's see what happens. After bishop takes e6, king to e3, so we're getting centralized and putting the king on d4. Bishop to g4, and after bishop g4, we're looking for bishop d3. Well, cool move. I mean, literally, you can make many moves here. In fact, king d4 was a move as well. There was a few moves here. You have and I think they're all the same, in fact, according to the engine. Bishop c2, bishop d3, and a king to d4 was also a move as well. But after bishop to d3, bishop e6. So he backs the bishop up to e6 here, just saying, hey, cool, you want to draw? Hey, yeah, well, I'll take a draw, like no problem. I'm about to draw Karpov, like I'm good. So bishop e6, and then Karpov says, not today. We got to play this one out, big fella. After king to d4, there's bishop back to g4. Okay, so in this position, you need a plan, right? You need a plan. You can't just aimlessly and mindlessly moving the pieces. You have to actually have a plan. And here with this, of course, pawn structure tells you the plan and lots of things like that. There's an ISO pawn here. And of course, yeah, we have the double pawns, but we can always play g3. And we have what we call the reserve tempi, where sometimes if you need it, you can actually push one of these pawns to put your opponent in Zugzwang. That is the idea of the reserve tempi, is to put your opponent, make it their move, and they'll have to make a move they don't want to do, and which could be actually losing. There's also another method you can use here called the triangulation. We're trying to get a position where it's their move. Same positions or same pieces, right? We're going to move around, but it's their move. So let's see what happens. After bishop to g4, bishop c2. Bishop e6, bishop b3. So now we're attacking d5. So if you play around here, we're going to take on d5. So he says, not today, bishop f1. Then bishop d1. We're trying to go bishop g4. And then bishop e6. And then he plays bishop f3. Oh my goodness. What just happened? I thought this was a draw. This is exactly what he wanted here, is the Zugzwang position where now it's your move. And any move that you make is not going to be fine for you. If you move the king, then anywhere you go, I'm putting the king on the other way. You go this way, I go that way. You go that way, I go this way. So the king's going to be able to get in. Now, so he's like, okay, cool. Well, I just moved the bishop. What's the problem with this position? Like, why is it just losing? Well, if I move the bishop, obviously off of the protection of the pawn, I'm going to take the pawn. Very simple. And if you step away like he does, we go bishop g4 for the score, and we're getting right in where we wanted to. Wow, that's a big boy move here. And actually, believe it or not, this is very advanced chess. He resigned right here. Port just said, wow, I'm done. Like, I can't do anything. And he resigned. The game was over. But reason being is because the bishop is now going to get to c8. And if you stop me, of course, then I get in. I get in either way. I'm getting the opposition. I'm getting even more, especially if I can run this way. The bishop covers the d pawn. This is terrible. What about bishop e6? Okay, easy. Takes. And then we can play g4 here to stop your king from running in. g4, okay, king d6, and we can play f5. We got passed pawns. They must be pushed. You could also play a3 as well, but f5 is just crushing. 100% winning, and after takes, I mean, this is over here. King takes is coming as well. You can't stop the passed pawns. You can't even push this one. This one's over, but after bishop g4, he resigned. Sweet game. That was in game number 2. Now let's move on to in game number 3. And here we are with in game number 3. In this in-game, of course, or it's actually about to be an in-game after the next few moves, Karpov is down a piece. This is Karpov versus Hubner in 1982. So let's see what happened. After rook to e1, which is the last move from Karpov, there was knight to d7 attacking the queen. So now the queen is attacked. Karpov is still down a piece. You have to do something here. What do you do? It is white to move. What would you do? Here it is, guys. Karpov says, rook takes d7. Yes, I'm down a piece, and I don't care. I'm down a piece, but I'm still a beast. After queen takes d7, knight to f5, and we live hitting mate on g7. Sheesh. So he has to defend it. So he plays f6, which is very simple. Defending the mate. I'm up a piece, says black. What are you going to do about it? Well, white says, hey, now usually, there's exceptions in chess. And there's many rules in chess. And one of the rules is trade when you're up, not when you're down. I'm down a full piece. I shouldn't be looking for trades, but there are exceptions. The first exception is I'm Karpov. The second exception is when I play queen d5 check, takes and takes. I got 2 passers. That's a rough one. 2 passed pawns. You need to stop them. So bishop f4, he says, okay, you know what? I might just capture. I might just capture. So he says, well, if you're going to capture, well, g3 first. Let's just see where you're going to put the bishop. So he backs up to c7. Bishop to c7. And instead of just playing e3, which actually runs into an immediate bishop takes d6, knight takes, which is honestly totally fine. This could be very playable, but Karpov wanted a little bit more, saying that, okay, I can play d6 kind of whenever I want to. King c2 is actually the third best engine move here, d6 being the best, obvious. But king to c2, he said, let's just see what he does. King to c2, no problems here after king to c2, b5. And then he says, you know what? I can still play d6. When I find a good move, look for a better one. You know what? Thanks for the gumdrop. Knight takes h6, king h7, and we're going to go right back to f5. And we lie, threatening d6, and we got a pawn out of it as well. So after knight f5, there's rook to g8, right? d6 is still in the picture, and he says, you know what? Yeah, let's do it now. d6 is now the move here, right? And it's so much patience. So much just patience and composure. Boa Constrictor, the nickname for Karpov they gave him at one point, right? It's just very, very nice chess to see. Methodical, strong, and systematic all at the same time. Tactical, everything you want in a chess game. After d6, there's bishop a5 hitting the rook, still keeping an eye here on the d8 square. Now, sacking the rook would be wrong, and d7 doesn't work because I'll just take, and then I'll sack everything else back here. Usually, that's how it will go. I mean, maybe you might still be okay, sacking the rook. But after bishop a5, he plays rook to e6, just to put the rook here to take and also push as well. After rook e6, there was rook g5, hitting the knight. Then we take on f6. Then he takes on h5. And then his sure move from here. I mean, this is an easy one. Easy. What you going to do? White to move. Oh, it's d7. Wow, look at, I mean, these are disgusting. This is very, very scary here. This is a family channel. We have to get this off the screen very quickly before we get in trouble over here. d6 and d7. Wow, look at that. I'm going to queen here because queening here, he just takes everything. And now, I mean, we're up a piece. We're still winning, but this one's much better. So he plays rook to h2. And then after knight to e3, there was a resignation. Now, knight e3 is actually a really cool move. I mean, knight e3 just defends the f2 pawn. That's all it does. It's just defending the f2 pawn. I mean, he could have really moved like knight anywhere. Knight d6, maybe even rook h6 is another move too as well. But he chose knight e3, very safe, solid, defending the pawn, and you can't stop me from queening on the e8 square, which is going to give me an extra queen. What a game. That was crazy, even being down a piece. Of course, Karpov find all the right combinations here and a little bit of finesse at the end as well. That was endgame number 3. And now let's move on to endgame number 4. And here we are with endgame number 4. Now, this one right here, oh yeah, this is a legendary one. This is Garry Kasparov playing with the black pieces, and of course, Karpov is white. Karpov versus Kasparov, 1984. Guys, legendary matchup. This game was actually game number 9. And in this game here, there's, of course, the last move was King F2 from Karpov, King F2. And you have what looks like, which is a super equal endgame. I mean, super equal, right? And these are actually some of the hardest ones to play, especially when your opponent just doesn't want to take a draw, number one. And also when you're trying to fight. I mean, this is a world championship, so they're not just trying to take a quick draw kind of thing. So with that being said, after King F2 here, first off, look at the pawn structure. 3 on this side, 3 versus 3, 1 versus 1, 2 versus 2. Like, same pieces, like everything's the same. And it's miraculous to see what happens in this game. After King F2, Knight to F5, putting the knight on a better square. I mean, why not? Knight to C2. Now my pieces feel passive as white here. After knight to C2, there's F6. We're trying to expand a little bit. Maybe play G5, but honestly, very an easy equal position. Bishop to D3 from Karpov here. Just putting the pieces on better squares. In these type of positions, you have to learn how to be good at doing nothing. This is the hardest part a lot of times, is getting good at doing nothing. And Bishop D3, it really doesn't do anything, but it does actually put the bishop on a better square, right? So if you can't really threaten anything or make real legit threats or try to push forward, hey, you know what piece can I make better? And Bishop to D3 does exactly that. After Bishop D3, there is a G5. And now, instead of just taking on G5 first, Karpov says, let me look at this position. What is going on in this position? In fact, this is such an equal position. How can I make it unequal or imbalanced or unbalanced in a way? So what he does is take on F5. So now we have a bishop versus a knight in game. And what kind of bishop? In fact, the kind actually matters. Where, I mean, this bishop isn't the greatest. I mean, it is a good bishop. Like, you have places to go. But imagine if this pawn wasn't here, how much scope would the bishop have? And same if these pawns were on dark squares, how much scope would the bishop have? So with that being said here, this was a brilliant strategy here from Karpov here, as he makes it a bishop versus knight in game, where a lot of times, especially if it's a bad bishop or not the best bishop, the knight can overpower the bishop in many cases, being both color complexes. I can be on white squares, I can be on dark squares, I can move around, I can attack many things at one time, being the knight. So after bishop takes F5, knight E3 hitting the bishop. Bishop to B1, just keeping some range, keeping the knight at bay here. And then B4, gain some space and using the dark square strategy, which means, hey, your opponent has a light square bishop, I'm putting my pieces on dark squares. If your opponent has a dark square bishop, I'm putting my pieces on light squares. So after B4, there's G takes H4. And instead of G takes H4, guys, I mean, the level of play to be able to make this kind of move is insane. How many of you, raise your hand, everyone, raise your hand. How many of you would take here on H4? I'm going to raise mine too. Gonna raise my hand, right? Both my hands, right? But here, he played knight to G2. Knight to G2. Insane. I mean, what a strong move. That is like, wow. That is just mind blown. Knight to G2. Instead of taking a pawn back, world championship, get you here, right? World championship, he did not take the pawn back. And he says that, okay, you know what? I'm going to take this pawn. You can actually have yours, but these are going to be weak. I'm going to be able to use my knight. And if I'm able to do something, I can use the passed pawn. So temporarily sacrificing a pawn in a way, which is pretty cool. Pretty cool stuff there. But after pawn takes, knight to G2. And after knight to G2, instead H3 doesn't work, obviously, because knight F4. And you're not queening. Like, if you thought you were, like, think again. Like, you're not queening. So he takes on G3, obviously. And then king takes back. And now black's up a pawn. But that's temporary, right? These are very weak pawns here. And after king e6, knight f4 check. And the reason why I did this is just because, hey, this pawn's like lost. This pawn's going to be lost. And I might actually really be able to get something going here. The knight is able to jump around, like made some imbalances, unbalanced the game a little bit is what he was looking for. And he was very successful with it. After king takes G3, king e6, and knight f4, king f5, and takes. He moves the king back to e6. And it's almost like, wait, is Garry going for a draw now? Does Gary want to draw? Probably doesn't. Obviously doesn't want to draw. Not just for like, oh, draw, right? But we're going to play this out. But, you know, it's just it's showing that, hey, I don't have many moves anymore. And this knight is going to be able to jump around because you don't have that many moves. So after knight f4 check, king to d6 and king to g4. So our goal here, what is king g4 about? I can't go forward, but I can go forward and go around the back way, see who's home. Back door. King g4, bishop c2, king h5. Oh, yeah. Bishop d1, he says, wait a second, hold up. Yeah, you're not going too far, Karpov. Where you think you're going here? And then he says, well, I'm going to g6, Kasparov. King e7, defending the pawn, and then actually knight takes d5. Now, this is still totally fine, right, for black. Literally, this is an equal position because f3 is still hanging. So after king e6, knight check, but if king to d6, right, if king d6, he could take on f6, and it was take on f3. And he's like, fine here. And like, yeah, I'm fine. You know, I can always usually keep the square on lock here, and you actually can't approach with your king. And if you move the knight, I can go forward. So it's going to take a long time. White's still probably going to press that one as much as he possibly can. But king e6 is what he chose. So after knight f2 check, or knight c7 check, king d7, we take on a6. And now the knight, like, wasn't we just down a pawn? Weren't we just down a pawn? Now we're up 2 pawns? Like, how does chess work? What is that? What is this? Knight takes a6, bishop takes f3. Now we're up a pawn as white. And then king takes f6. Somehow down 2 pawns now. Crazy. So after king takes f6, king to d6, king e5, king f5. Right. And again, how did this happen? This all happened because he decided to make a decision to make it an unbalanced game. Hey, you know what? I am going to have the knight versus bishop. Instead of having the same amount of pieces, giving us more chances of a draw, I'm going to make it a little different, make you really work for this. And I'm going to use the knight because it's better than your bishop in this particular endgame. King f5, king c5, hitting the bishop. Bishop moves, king e3, we walking all the way back around. King c4 and knight to c5. Need to reroute. Now it's all about maneuvering and literally trying to push this pawn and win this one as well. The knight to c5 is brilliant, stops king to b3. So he goes bishop c6, says, hey, your move, Karpov, what you going to do? Knight d3, you know, and of course he could go in here if he'd like, but he didn't. If king to b3, I mean, you have king d2, I think. And if king takes a3, there's king c3, king a2. And I think it was knight f4 and pushing, right? Knight f4, king's boxed out, and you just push in and then get the king around as well. This should be completely winning by a lot. After bishop c6, knight to d3, bishop g2. He didn't want to go for that because he saw that. And then knight e5 check, right? So hitting the king, again, this is maneuvering. Move him here, check here, walk the king back around, push the pawn. Okay, do it again, right? Think twice about everything I do. It takes a while. King to c3, knight to g6. What a move. Just backing up here and trying to push. King to c4, knight e7, knight f5, or sorry, bishop b7, knight back to f5, here threatening knight d6. I mean, this was a long game, guys, 70 moves. And bishop to g2. Bishop g2. Now, finally, right, they reached this position before, but it's a little bit different now. It's a little bit different because now there's a check, which wins the pawn. And right here, in fact, you know, he got in trouble here. Knights can move around so much, guys. I'm sure you've been through a game where you lost because the knight, like, or sometimes, you know, the games like where the knight's on a7 and somehow catches the pawn that's trying to queen on the g file. How is that even possible? We don't know, right? Because of the checks and all these kind of things that can happen. Knights can bounce around pretty quickly if you're able to with checks involved. So knight to e7, threatening, of course, maybe knight c6, also d5 at the right moment, taking opposition. But bishop to b7 and a knight to f5, knight d6, thank you. And thanks for the pawn. Gum drop there, king a4. And after knight d6, Gary resigns. He can't have any moves, really. Like, he's about to walk the king around this way and push. If you ever take, I can push, right? So now you're like boxed in now. So at this point, Gary resigned. But where this started at, this was equal, right? Starting out, it was just equal. Then he said, hey, you know what? Let's make this a real game, unbalance some things. I'm tired of it being completely equal. Let's go knight versus bishop and test you there. And he was very successful with it. That was endgame number 4. And now let's move on to the final one, which is endgame number 5. And here we are with endgame number 5. In this endgame right here, this was Karpov versus Andrei Statazu in 2005. So right here, this position, this was after b6, and there's like an extra 30 moves here. And it's like a full game from right here. Literally from right here, there's another full game. But we're going to fast forward through some stuff here so you guys can see the very nice precision in the end. After f3 here, f3 is a strange looking move, obviously. But what f3 does is just saying, hey, what else are you going to do with your king, really? Right? So f3, not only does it help me play e4, but I can step my king to f2 and get out of this nasty pin. So after f3, there's f5 and then king to f2, stepping off of the back rank where this pin was there. And then rook to b4, kind of just keeping an eye on e4 just in case he plays it. He's like, hey, if you're trying to play e4, we're not going to let you. And then Karpov says, oh, really? And he plays it anyway. e4. E4 is the move. After e4, f takes e4. F takes e4. What it does is activates the bishop. The bishop's now active. So if rook takes e4, you're in trouble immediately after bishop d3. Yikes. So instead of rook takes, there was bishop takes e4, which allows us to now get the bishop out to a6, threatening b7. Very beautiful. Now, after rook a4, white just plays b7. Like, Karpov's just like, okay, and are you really going to take this? And he does take it. Rook a6, thank you. Rook a6, in fact, right here is kind of like forced in the way. I mean, rook b4, I could just end up moving the rook and winning the bishop back with that way with the check. If bishop takes b7, that would look like this here, or sorry, rook b4. I could move the rook really anywhere, maybe king e3 first. But after b7, there was rook takes a6 and rook a7, rook h8 check. King takes h8 and now a queen. Now we've reached a different type of position here where you have to be extremely accurate. And if these pawns are gone, it may be black that's actually pushing for more due to the fact that he can queen these pawns. I also have a rook and a bishop, and all you have is a queen. Yeah, that's cool and all, but all you got is a queen, right? But these extra two pawns really help here. But right here, this part right here is probably the best part of the endgame, is how precise Karpov was here. In this position, you have to be very precise or else you're going to get black chances to either make a fortress or even more sometimes. So after b8 queen, king h7, the most precise move here is queen to c7 check, making sure we check him first. There's a big move that happens after queen c7 check. King to g6, and this is the move. The only move, in fact, every other move right here is zeros. Now, of course, as humans, it's going to be harder to play. But right here, I mean, this is only one move wins, and here it is. Queen c4 for the score. Double attack on the bishop and the rook at the same time, forcing black's next reply, which is bishop b7 defending. Next move here, another one, actually, forcing move, queen b3. If you go bishop to c8, queen c2 check. If you move the bishop anywhere that is not e4, I'm going to play queen d3 check and pick off the rook. Yikes. So that forces bishop to e4. After bishop e4, okay, now next move here, you actually could have went back to c4, but he's like, I'm not going to do that, right? Don't want to repeat moves and make it a draw. He's definitely going to take it. So we'll play king e3. King e3 attacking the bishop and bishop to f5. And now right here, this is excellent. All these moves happen for him to now hitting with g4. Sheesh, great move there. Absolutely great move. If bishop takes g4, pretty obvious, guys. Queen to d3 check. That's the whole idea. So now we're getting some material out of it. Bishop has no good squares. And when you move your rook a5, now we take on g4. Now we've reached another part of the position where, okay, yes, I'm winning as white here, but I still have work to do. And even actually after queen takes e6, this helps a lot. Picking off a pawn after rook f6. White should win this. White should win this, but it's not easy at all. After rook f6, queen e8 check, king g7, and after king g7, all right, guys, it's up to you. It's white to move here. How would you finish this off? This is not easy at all here, but you need to figure this out. So what are you going to do? In this position, the move here, played by Karpov, in fact, there's a lot of moves you can make. In fact, engine, right? Queen e7, queen e5, and queen d7, all from engine. All from engine. But Karpov says h4. Okay, h4, right? Let's see what you do. After g takes h4, queen e7 check, king g6, and then king to e4. So king e4, there's a lot of work here, guys. There's like another 14 moves here, still a lot. So after king e4, h3, a little scary, but we have checks. So queen e8 check, king g7, queen d7, picking off that one. That was the whole idea here, is to be able to check around, pick off some pawns, right? And then after king h8, queen takes h3. So now we don't have to worry about this pass pawn anymore. But we do have another one. But again, we can use the same method we just did to pick up this one to pick up this other one on h6 when or if he ends up pushing it. Rook to g6. And now you have two pieces left, king and queen. You have to make this work. In fact, king, queen versus king, rook is a win for king, queen. But there is a lot of finesse and a lot of moves involved. Lots of moves involved. So you have to figure that out. After rook to g6, king f5, king f5, king h7, and then queen to d3. Pretty cool move. We're running into discoveries, especially if the rook backs up or something. You have king f6 with a check. Rook g5 check, king f6 check. Cool. It's pretty cool to like answer a check with the check. Rook G5 check, King F6 check. Like that never usually happens. And after King F6 check, King H8. King H8, very nice. All right, guys, white to move. What would you play here? Now, of course, there's a few moves you can make, literally. We're going to show you what Karpov did, but what would you do? Okay, now, in fact, Queen D8, if you said that, you're right. Queen H3, if you said that, you're right. Queen D2, if you said that, you're right. You're actually all right here. Queen D2, you're actually all right here. But the move, I mean, all of these moves work. Queen E4, even probably this one works too. Queen D7. But Queen E4 was the move from Karpov, and after Queen E4, King to G8, Queen E6 check, King H7, right? This is not easy, guys. And then this is not easy. Like, what would you do right here? This is not that easy at all. It's still work to do. You can't actually cross and mate. Like, how do you do this, guys? How do you actually do this? It is white to move. What would you like to do here? I'll show you the engine. I'll show you the engine. Queen F7, King H8, and then it says put the king on E6. That's going to take a while. Queen E4 check, King H8, Queen E7. You also have Queen E7 immediately, King H8, then it says King E6. That's the way they want you to go. But Karpov did similar, which is just King F7. And if you said that, pretty good, King F7. Because if there's a Rook G7 check, then we go King F8. We're trying to get closer to the king. But Rook G8 was the move that was played. All right, Rook G8, finish this off if you can here. White to move, what do you do, chat? What do you do? Rook G8. After Rook G8, Queen F5, and we live, forcing his next reply, King H8. Okay. What's next? After King H8, there's a Queen E5 check here. Queen E5, King H7, and then, oh man, this is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. This is absolutely beautiful. What he played here was Queen E6, and he resigned. Like, he resigns right here. Now, let's see why. Let's see why. Like, if Rook, and this is like triangulation. Same position, but now it's your move. Like, that's so nuts how he did this to make it your move. He triangulated and make it zugzwang, so now any move you make is losing. If you move the king, then obvious queen takes H6 is mate. If Rook to G5, then we can play King F8. Well, what's the problem with King F8? Okay, what if we just move the Rook or something, like Rook here, maybe. Queen F5, King H8, and then you have Queen F6, King H7, Queen F5, King H8, and then I think it's Queen E5. Yeah, it's Queen E5, and you could take easy. Right, so it's hard because you don't have any square for the Rook to move to that is defended, and the other moves are like mate. And the problem here, anywhere you move, I can ladder check you, like ladder, like you literally ladder check you here, then check here, right? Check back and forth, like the pattern until I pick up the Rook, right? It's really cool how that whole sequence worked out there. This is a very difficult end game here. But of course, Karpov was able to do it with ease, ending in triangulation for zugzwang. This was very nice here, and I hope you guys enjoyed all of these top 5 Anatoly Karpov end games. I'm National Master James Canty III here with Chess.com, and I'll see you guys on the next video.